Because he lives, I can face tomorrow. Because he lives.
Good morning. This is Antioch Missionary Baptist Church. Today is March the 20th. Today's the first day of spring. And this is the Reach Out Ministry. I want to talk to you today about the animals and creatures that God made and how He has caused certain one of them to perform. First of all, let's think about Noah when the rains came, and we know he put 2 of everything, and the animals that had to eat meat, they took on 7 animals to feed the lions and tigers and such. You find that a little ironic that all these animals just showed up at the ark? God had to put it in their mind to march to get to the ark, to load the ark, and to take off. After the water began to rain and the ark floated around, they think they found part of the ark on top of a mountain in Turkey, by the way. I had heard a few years ago. I want to tell a quick story about Jason. When Manda was living out in Lorena years ago, quite a few years ago, they had a dog, and Jason was out there riding on a dirt bike behind their house, and he noticed he lost his wallet. Well, he looked and he didn't find it that day. He went back out there the next day, and he asked God in prayer, Lord, you can, if you're nothing else, get this dog to help me find my wallet. And about the time he finished his prayer, he looked around, that dog was sitting there with his wallet in his mouth. God sent that dog to help him find his wallet. Put it in his mind to go and find the wallet. I know one time years and years ago when the zoo was still out there by the airport, Ann and I went out there, and God can cause certain birds to talk, parrots and minor birds and such. And we was walking through the exhibit and where the birds were, and all of a sudden I hear this real fancy, sexy sounding voice said, "Hello, Joe." Man, I looked around, I said, "Who said that?" And Ann was standing, she looked around in a little bit, "Hello, Joe." Looked around, she said, "Who's saying that?" And I said, "I don't know." Turned the corner and it's a bird. I offered them $200 for that bird, and they wouldn't let me have it. But it was sounded so much like a woman saying, "Hello, Joe." I never will forget that as long as I live. Well, God uses animals to send to Pharaoh flies, frogs, locusts. All these came upon Pharaoh's people when Moses was asking him, "Let my people go." And he sent the locusts, the flies, and the frogs. God has a way of using every kind of creature in every kind of way. It says over here in Genesis in chapter 3, we're going to start in verse 1. Genesis 3, chapter 3, verse 1. Now the serpent was more subtle than all the other beasts in the field, which the God had made. And he said unto the woman, Yea, have God said, ye shall not eat of every tree of the garden? He's asking Eve, well, didn't God give you permission to eat of every tree of the garden? And the woman said unto the serpent, we may eat of the fruit of the trees of the garden, but of the fruit that is it of the tree which is in the midst of the garden, God has said, ye shall not eat it, neither shall ye touch it, lest ye die. And the serpent said unto the woman, ye shall not surely die, for the Lord knoweth that in the day you eat thereof, your eyes will be opened, and you shall be as gods, knowing good from evil. So the word subtle means several different things. It means fine, it means sophisticated, nice, tactful, tight, and wicked. So it has a lot of different meanings. And when the woman saw that the tree was good for food, and that it was a pleasure to the eyes, and a tree to be desired to make one wise, she took of the fruit thereof, and did eat, and gave also to her husband, and he did eat. Well, their eyes got open because they realized then they were naked. And they began to sew fig leaves together to hide their nakedness. We know the story that God come in the evening. He said, Adam, where art thou? Adam calling him. It wasn't that he didn't know, he was wanting Adam to respond to him by him asking. It kind of works that way in your heart when you accept Christ. Joe, where art thou? I'm using me as an example. And then the day I answered him, here I am, Lord. I became a child of God. Now, you're talking about animals. When he was dealing with me to serve him, I said, I was like Ben talking about how he told God, I don't want to be a preacher. Well, God was dealing with me to be a preacher, and I didn't want to be a preacher either. It's the nature of a rooster to crow when it gets daylight, right? Yeah. Well, that night I was up nearly all night. And I mean, 2 or 3 o'clock in the morning, I woke up and it was on my mind. And for whatever reason, the old rooster we had out there on the place we lived on was crowing. And it wasn't nowhere near daylight. Crowing. And so I just said, God, if you want me to be a preacher, don't let that rooster crow no more. He didn't crow no more. And when daylight come, that's the time they're supposed to crow. He didn't crow at daylight. He put it all on the front doorstep for me. This is what I want you to do. So I've got a story about how God worked with me to come into the ministry when I myself was saying, not me, Lord, not me. I can't even stand up and give a good oral book report. And he said, don't you worry about it. I'll use you. I'll give you the things to say. And I've been preaching now for right at 50 years. Long time. I was preaching even before me and my wife married. Long time. Then we're going to read over here in 2 Chronicles 11, starting in verse 3. 2 Chronicles 11, starting in verse 3. speak unto Rehoboam, the son of Solomon, king of Judah, and say to all Israel and Judah and Benjamin, saying, Thus saith the Lord, ye shall not go up and fight against your brethren. Return every man to his house, for this thing is done of me, and they shall obey the words of the Lord. Return from going against Jerome. You know, God speaks to us just like he does an animal. He tells us who we want to do if we're open-minded and we have an open heart and open mind to what God's telling us he wants us to do. And here's an example of him telling them what they needed to do. If you will, go with me now into 2 Peter. And we're going to start in verse 15. 2 Peter chapter 2, verse 15. Which I have forsaken for the right way and gone astray, following the way of Balaam, the son of Bozar, who loved the wages of unrighteousness, and was rebuked for his iniquity. And the dumb ass, speaking with a man's voice, forbade the madness of the prophet. Now, Balaam was a prophet of God, yet Israel's enemies offered him so much money to go and speak against his people. And so that's what he thought he might just go ahead and do it for the money. Now, in Numbers chapter 22, starting in verse 22. In Numbers 22:22, and God's anger was kindled because he went, and the angel of the Lord stood in the way for adversary against him. Now he was riding upon his ass, and two servants with him. And when the ass saw the angel of the Lord standing in the way, and his sword drawn in his hand, and as the ass turned aside out of the way and went out into the field, and Balaam smote the ass and turned her again into the way. So he whipped her because she got off the road and went out into a field. It says, and when the ass saw the angel of the Lord, she thrust herself into the wall and crushed Balaam's foot against the wall, and he smote her again. So after they got back on the road, she ran into a wall, and I imagine it was like an embankment, and it mashed his foot, so he whipped her the second time. And the angel of the Lord went further and stood in a narrow place where there was no way to turn neither to the right hand or to the left. The angel of the Lord standing in the road, can't turn right, can't turn left. And it says, and when the ass saw the angel of the Lord, she fell down under Balaam, and Balaam's anger was kindled, and he smote the ass with his staff. 3 times now he's whipped his ass because she's not going down the road like he wants her to go. And then the Lord opened the mouth of the ass, and she said unto Balaam, what have I done unto thee that thou hast smited me these 3 times? And Balaam said unto the ass, because thou hast mocked me. I would therefore were a sword in my hand, for now I would kill thee. He said, if I had a sword in my hand, I'd kill you for what you've done. And as the ass said unto Balaam, I am not I thy ass on which hast thou ridden ever since I was thine unto this day? And was I ever wont to do unto you thee? And he said, Nay. Then the Lord opened the eyes of Balaam, and he saw the angel of the Lord standing in the way with his sword drawn and in his hand. And he bowed down his head and fell flat on his face. And the angel of the Lord said unto him, whereas thou hast smited the ass these 3 times, behold, I went out to withstand thee, because thy way is perverse before me. And the ass saw me and turned me from thee 3 times. Unless she had turned from me, surely now also I have slain thee, saith, save her alive. If the ass hadn't done what she did, by now I would have killed you. The angel of the Lord, with sword in hand, said, I would have killed you had it not been for your ass. So he says, and the angel of the Lord said unto Balaam, go with the men, and not only word that I shall speak unto thee, that thou shalt speak unto Balaam, went out with the prince of Balak. You know, God, we know a parrot can talk. We've seen how a serpent talked to Eve in the Garden of Eden, telling her it's okay to eat of the fruit. We've seen now how a donkey talked. We've seen many things that God can use an animal for to let people know I'm in this animal. I created all creatures, and I can use these creatures in whatever way I see fit to even make a man understand. If it nothing like the crowing of a rooster, as it happened with Peter, and it happened with me. Only when Peter heard the rooster crow the 3rd time, that's when the Lord said, that's when you're going to realize you've denied me. When you hear the rooster crow, they said, this is a man that was with him. No, I don't know this man. As he warmed himself by their fire, I know he's one of his disciples. No, I'm not. See, he was denying that God, through Christ, had ever been with him. And at the 3rd time, he even cursed and said, I do not know this man. That's when the rooster crowed. And I like to think of it this way. When that rooster crowed, Jesus didn't say a word to Peter. He just looked at him. Y'all ever get the look when you was a child? Mama just had to look at me a certain way. I got the message. She never had to say a word. But when that rooster crowed, Peter's eyes made contact with Jesus' eyes, and Peter began to weep because he had denied Christ, the very thing that Christ said you will do. He did. I tell you what, the night the rooster crowed for me to preach, Ben said he read a verse. Was it Isaiah 58 what? 58:1. The verse I read was in Matthew For whosoever shall forsake his mother, his father, his brother, his sister, and go and preach the gospel. That's what I first read. Thankfully, though, I have a family of believers. I didn't really have to forsake any of my members of my family. But some of my friends forsook me, at least for a while. Some of them came back, and I even baptized a few of them. Amen. They always said, "You're going to be a preacher. I remember when you did this, you did this, you did this." You don't realize the life you lived before you were a Christian can turn around when you become a child of God. And I tell them, I'm not like that anymore. I'm a changed person because of Christ Jesus. I know that God can use any kind of creature or any person to get his point across to us. And sometimes it might take an animal like an ass or a plague of animals like Pharaoh experienced, frogs, flies, and locusts. But anyway, anyhow, God can bring all these animals together to get on Noah's ark, to be spared by the flood that was to come. But anyway, it happens anyway. We know God can use all creatures in whatever way he sees fit, sometimes to get his point across to us, whether it be a crowing rooster or whatever. But I know beyond a shadow of a doubt, through all of the calling that he wanted me to become a preacher and how I fought it and I didn't want to do it. Daddy was a deacon. I said, call him. He's a deacon. He's more qualified than I am. And now I've been preaching 50 years. When I finally surrendered and gave up my will to do his will. And I've had high points, I've had low points. It's a wonderful thing to have someone to ask you to do a holy matrimony for them. That's a pleasure. But I've also had to do quite a few funerals, and even a couple of them were children. And that's a hard thing when you have to give a sermon to a loving family whose young child passed away or died in an accident. That's the hard part. But the part that we must always keep in mind is that God's not going to put on you more than you can't handle. And even through preaching a child's funeral, he helped me get through it. He helped me get through it.